This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by the Virginia Education Association. An investment in teachers today will pay dividends tomorrow. Dignity Memorial. The Dignity Network provides professional and compassionate funeral, memorial, cremation, and cemetery services throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association for jobs, the economy, and public health, committed to advancing health and economic opportunity for all Virginians. Virginia Tourism Corporation, promoting why Virginia is for lovers, lovers of wine and craft beers, the outdoors, beaches, history, music, and more. Fall in love with Virginia at virginia.org. Additional support provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.
Welcome back to Secretary Aubrey Layne. Glad to have you on This Week in Richmond to talk about your Secretary of Finance. We were talking just before we were starting the show that we also could talk about transportation when you were that secretary because of what's happening. You know, it was way back last September that we had the opportunity to have you on the show. And you talked about needing to do something about widening the interstate was one of the issues that you talked about at that time. So I would encourage you to jump right in on that issue because that was something late breaking and reconvened time to finally get worked out.
Well, first of all, David, thank you for having me back here. I guess it's appropriate for the Secretary of Finance to be on tax day speaking today. But a little bit on Interstate 81. It really was a great coming together of the governor putting it back down since, as you know, during the regular session, it had been pretty much delegated to a study. I think the governor felt strongly, him and Secretary Valentine, that we weren't going to know a whole lot more a year from now than we don't already know.
You already studied it.
And have studied. We've studied it for many years, and so really good effort put forth by not only the executive branch but the legislature working together and coming up finally with a solution on Interstate 81, which was the last remaining significant interstate that we really hadn't done a lot of work on. And so now we've got a fix with some additional revenues. It won't do exactly everything what everybody wanted, but it should go a long ways in being able to finally bring some relief to the motorist on 81.
And like you say, that's a good start, at least a good start to do that. And does some of that funding also go for the other interstate systems?
That's right. The compromise did end up having statewide funding, so a lot of it will go specific revenues to 81, where there'll be such things as climbing lanes and acceleration lanes. And as you know, 81 has a pretty steep grade in some parts of the state to allow the slower trucks to move, keep traffic flowing. But as you mentioned out, those motorists in all parts of the state, particularly Northern Virginia and Hampton roads, they'll get some additional revenues also out of this. And I understand that will help alleviate some of the pressure off of Smart Scale by being able to fund some of these projects without having to go through that. As you well know, transportation, like many of the items in the budget, we don't have enough revenues to do all that we need to do, but this was a great compromise. And again, to the governor, the legislature, Secretary Valentine and her team, great job.
Other matters on the budget, because you could got any number of them you could talk about. I just wanted to start with that since that was one of the ones that you were saying way back in September that needed to happen, and it did.
Well, you know, I guess the first story for the budget this year was on the revenue side, and that had to do with tax conformity coming out of our federal friends up in D.C. And the legislature did come to agreement that we would have full conformity this year, and then they made some adjustments for tax years 2019 and forward by raising the standard deduction and a few other miscellaneous tweaks to our tax code. But the good news is that gave certainty to our taxpayers, and tax season is proceeding right along as we had hoped for. Even though the compromise came about the middle of February, there's a little delay where the tax department had to work out it for people filing. But it's gone smoothly, and thanks again to the legislature for reaching agreement with the governor on conformity. So that was really to set the stage. The revenues allowed us to move into the appropriation side of the budget. I should also mention, though, besides those additional tax revenues, our underlying economy is still strong. Our sales tax growth and our withholding growth because of job creation in the Commonwealth, still good. We started growing about a year, 15 months ago, and that trend continues on. So that's what's really good news for the economy. People of Virginia, from our budgetary standpoint, our revenues are holding up. Then on the appropriation side, there were some key initiatives put forth by the governor that the legislature did agree with. First of all, teacher raises. Yes, I think that was, and also for other state employees, raises, right. Something that we had not taken as much initiative on that we should have. That come to fruition this year, so that's good news. Certainly our financial condition, the governor suggested and the legislature agreed with additional monies into reserves, making our credibility with the rating agencies, keeping us ready in case something does happen in the future. But investments in housing, investments in broadband, first rural broadband, which is very important across the state. Water quality, particularly in the agricultural area, keeping our streams clean to keep the health of the bay as the waters flow down. So it was a very, very good budget that came out. I think a lot of people, there were a lot of other headlines that besides the budget that were coming out of the General Assembly and the executive branch the last few months, but I think Virginians can take comfort in the hard work of doing the budget. Everybody came together, got that done, and as a result of that, Virginia's in a good place going forward.
You know, the broadband or high-speed internet, I think was the way you expressed it last September, was one of those initiatives. And while it falls somewhat outside of your secretariat, but it seems like there's concern that trying to figure out right now just where it's not. And you want to have it statewide, but if the primary providers are not willing to say where the gaps are, it makes it challenging.
Yes, it does. And in fact, the investment, we had $4 million in the budget, and now after this session, there's almost 19, an additional $15 million was put into the budget. And you're right, what we really need to do is to target those areas where we don't have that access. And a couple of the providers or several of the providers seem to think that's proprietary information. And while I can understand that in some respects, it's going to require an effort with them, a partnership with them to get this done. This is a multi-million, if not multi-hundred million dollar effort to bring this, and it's going to require working with them. So hopefully we'll find a solution on that. I know there's several groups that are working towards that end. Certainly Secretary Ball in Commerce and Trade, his initiative. I know the Tobacco Commission, Evan Feynman there are working. Even our transportation friends over at VDOT can play a part because of the right-of-way, allowing whether it's Wi-Fi or other access in their right-of-way. But a key component is going to be the private sector. And we understand it needs to be profitable for them, but for us to be able to work with them, we've got to know where the state can get its biggest bang for its investment also. So I'm pretty comfortable they'll work it out. And it's this whole idea of how government and how the private sector can come together to solve a need that works for everybody.
Well, I guess the private sector, the most expensive areas for them to provide are the ones that are missing.
Well, that's right. In fact, the logic would seem if it were profitable, they would have already done it. Right. But on the other hand, that's where government can play a role.
Yes. And
come in and make sure that we're providing all our citizens equal access. And if you look at broadband, that fits right up there, I think, with education, people's ability to work, keeping them informed. Technology changes so often, and without that access, it's going to be difficult to help some of these particularly disadvantaged areas rise up. And so I think that as we work through this, we'll find agreement with our private partners.
You know, whether it's some jobs that flow downstate from Amazon or other jobs that Secretary Ball and the governor are working on, that high-speed internet is so crucial, and it really is.
It really is. And you mentioned Amazon, which is another big part of the budget, the tech talent pipeline that was put in, investment to work with our universities to attract those degrees that are necessary to not only fund Amazon, but fund those jobs throughout the Commonwealth. Amazon got a lot of publicity because of the $150,000 jobs and the additional 25 to 38,000 jobs. Very important. But what it really allowed us to do was to make investments in those areas or bring them forward in education, in these degree production, that might have taken us longer to do. One of the things that will help us is to keep people in this state and also to build those pipelines in areas, Virginia Tech's in a rural area, other areas throughout the Commonwealth. And back to how we got started on this conversation, high-speed internet, or the access to that, is very important, not only in terms of the degree production, but our ability to bring those jobs in that are necessary to keep the people here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
You know, as one charged with working with the governor, managing the budget, help our viewers understand this. There's some that on Amazon that say, the state's giving them all that money, Isn't it more correct to say that upon their producing and having jobs, that then they get some tax benefits? It's not as like they're getting hundreds of millions of dollars handed to them just as they come into the state.
No, that's correct. And speaking of that partnership, Amazon has been great partners to work with.
That's good.
And we know, based with Stephen Murray over Virginia Economic Development Partnership, again, Secretary Ball and his team, working with the legislature, working with our financial constraints, we knew we were not going to be able to throw the big numbers out there some of these major states or larger states were offering. Nor would it have been great for our taxpayers to do that, or correct to be a good fiduciary. So what we said is, let's invest in Amazon as the jobs come in, but also let's invest in those activities like education, like transportation, that we should be doing anyway to help rise all boats that are all employees that come in. So what we did is, there's a large investment in education, a large investment in infrastructure, transportation. And yes, they are getting some direct incentives, but only after the jobs are created. In fact, 48 months.
I think that's the crucial part.
48 months. So we know it is incremental. It is jobs that are being done here. Look, I, as the Secretary of Finance, have to be a good steward of our taxpayer dollars. I wish we didn't have to pay. I understand Amazon is the richest and the most valuable company in the world. On the other hand, it makes sense for us to invest in those jobs, not only for Amazon, but help us to build these other pipelines and these other activities. And by having that money 48 months in advance before any incentives are paid, we know the taxpayers are protected, and we are making sure that we are getting what we paid for. So while I do understand some people's concerns, I'm very comfortable in saying that we were good fiduciaries, and Amazon has allowed us to invest in the Commonwealth of Virginia, not just give away incentives.
I would think that most people would, if they understood that it was coming, as you just said, that it's coming after they've produced, they'd say, oh, that they somehow got the misimpression, not from you, not from any legislators or the governor, but got the misimpression that Virginia was just writing them a check up front.
Well, as you know, there are protesters in other states, and they try to do that so here. But I think most people do understand. But there is a group, but why let the facts get in the way of your political ideas? And all we can do is continue to educate them and make sure that we are being good fiduciaries. But I'm very proud of what the executive branch, working with the legislature. I should point out that when we do these major incentives like that, we're walking hand in hand with Chris Jones, Chairman of Appropriations, Senators Norman and Hanger, on this major investment economic incentive fiduciary group that we have. They were a part of this process, and that's what made it work. We all pulled together, and I think that's what Virginians can take comfort in, that this was well thought through and not just wanting another public event where we said we got these guys in town really should help Virginia in a lot of ways.
I've seen some of the numbers that were out there during this process showing too that the taxes that would come into the Commonwealth from people who would have these jobs, whether it's a $150,000 job or whether it's a $50,000 job, that those taxes as they come in for those years, at the end of that 4 year, the money that would go to Amazon really is
a
almost
small percentage.
Almost a wash.
That's right, and that's called the multiplier effect, where not only is it the revenues for job growth coming to the state, people buying in the community, sales taxes, but property taxes they'll be paying. And as I said, they will help us keep people in the Commonwealth that we were educating but going to find jobs elsewhere. That's what this tech talent pipeline is about, and that will help an out-migration that we were seeing, particularly in the urban areas, Northern Virginia, but other areas. This will help keep those jobs here. That's important. Our rating agencies look at that, and that was one of the questions they asked. So over and above wanting to have those jobs, that was a very strategic point for the Commonwealth to invest in with Amazon to help address that out-migration. So again, they were great to deal with. They are good business people. Certainly they're looking out for themselves, but I can say they acted very responsibly and good citizens, good corporate citizens.
You know, I see quite a few of the legislators' emails that they send out to their constituents, and many of those in Southside and Southwest Virginia are saying, look, it's going to help provide more money for education, public school education. That the tax base that's coming in, I mean, as some of them have been questioned by their constituents, why did you vote for something for Amazon for Fairfax County? And they said, no, it's going, as you've said, it's going to raise the boats throughout the state. Well,
again, I'll point out many of the universities where these students are going to be trained, whether it's Virginia Tech, UVA, and some of the other, not just the ones in Northern Virginia. I know George Mason will be a part, but Old Dominion and Hampton Roads, all those universities that are submitting proposals to us now on how to develop these degrees. And that will help a lot of communities, UVA-wise being one. I know they've are going to submit a proposal. That's going to help a lot of those communities over and above just training the people, not for the jobs there, but the jobs just from the training, the programs that come in play. So that's, again, a key aspect that we've been trying to do is when we make these investments, how is it going to help the Commonwealth of Virginia as a whole, not just a particular area? And so that is very key as we walk through, particularly with these major investments, of where we're investing our monies in that.
If you switch over to another subject, you've gotten through the time of figuring out with the legislators and everyone come to agreement of what the changes in the tax law federally have meant. Going forward, are there bumps and hurdles or things that you're having to watch and that take place in Washington that will affect the Commonwealth and the other 49 states?
Yeah, there absolutely is. And one of the reasons that Virginia wanted to be work through this methodically, these changes, is because we're just now finally getting some of the guidelines from the IRS on how some of these major changes are going to happen.
Right.
So that's why I think we've worked very well with the legislature and worked through a very methodical program, not only this year, but also next year, how we're going to move forward. But you make a great point. I think both fiscal and monetary policy coming out of the federal authorities is going to impact Virginia in the future. Certainly on the monetary side, the monetary policy, interest rates have been a very positive help to the nation, but they have crept up lately and will probably continue to do so. But on the fiscal side, we continue to build debt at the national level. We're now over $21 trillion in debt, running at $1 trillion a year almost deficit. That's unsustainable. That usually means a reduction in programs. In fact, we mentioned today was tax day.
Yes.
In 2017, the federal government had a $4 trillion operating budget. It only collected taxes of $3.3 million, meaning almost $700 million was put into debt, and that's growing. We can't do that in the Commonwealth. We have to balance our budget. We can't print money. But this continuing debt is going to put pressure on discretionary spending coming out of Washington, D.C. In fact, it's one of the things I've planned to really highlight a lot this fall, working with the money committees. You know, things are going well for Virginia. Let's make sure we're prepared in case there are sudden turns, or the economy, as we know, is in its 11th or 12th year of growth. Stock market's over 10 years of going straight up. We hope it continues, but it may not. So let's make sure we're making wise decisions here in Virginia to make sure we're prepared for that if it comes down the pike. But it certainly can, and so we do watch policies coming out of the federal government very closely. When I was Secretary of Transportation, you may recall the Transportation Trust Fund went insolvent a couple of times. Right. That's coming back up in a few years. So we've got to make sure that Virginia's doing its part, but we can't do it without our federal partners. And we need to have revenue sources that we can depend on. So we'll see. That's part of the political process, but we certainly do watch that very closely.
I know the governor and you and your role in the legislature really works to try to get as much money possible in that so-called rainy day fund. And I don't know where it's standing right now, but I think not that it would be sufficient for a long time period, but it would help.
No, you're exactly right. In fact, the rainy day fund is constitutionally mandated if our revenues exceed a certain amount. But a couple years ago, working with the General Assembly, there was an additional cash reserves fund put in place. And at the end of this budget, we're going to have close to 5%, or about $1.3 billion in reserves. I'll remind you, we were under $300 million just a few years ago, and that put us on a negative watch with our rating agencies. That's been fixed. The governor has said he would like to see a minimum of 8% in reserves, which would be somewhere about $1.6 billion or more. But I think in talking with the legislature and others, we all see we need to even have more than that. If we were to have another economic downturn like we did in 2008, we would have a significant unfunded liability for our pension. We would have to cut programs. That's not the way to run a government. So I know it's on the mind of the monetary committees, the Senate Finance, House Appropriations, putting money in those reserves. The governor's made that commitment. So we're doing what we have to do to make sure we're prepared. But reserves are extremely important to our well-being.
Back September, and it wasn't that long ago, you did talk about the need to stabilize the public employee retirement fund. And so is that partially happening or some? It
is. They're doing a good job over there. One of the things that I have talked about, though, is making sure that the taxpayers of Virginia have a long-term say in what happens in their retirement fund, because we're the ultimate payers of that obligation. Right. Has nothing to do with them not doing a good job of their fiduciary responsibility. But that could be a significant hit to the general fund if we were to have a downturn in the stock market, a prolonged downturn. Right. In fact, they just ran a stress test and showed that it would be, in the hundreds of millions of dollars that would be impactful on our budget. So we continually work with them, but as a student of good governance, I think the people that actually pay the bill ought to have a little bit of say also in how those things are doing. So we'll continue working with them and other off-book liabilities, because that's what that is. The taxpayers of Virginia are responsible, not accounted for on our books. Right. We're making sure we do the minimum each year, but we should probably be doing more to make sure that is here for all the hard work that all these employees are putting in for years to come.
Secretary Layne, every time we have a conversation, I always wish we had an hour, but knowing that we only have half that much time, we have another minute or so.
Oh,
so what else would you want to say that you thought I was going to ask you about, but I didn't? Anything else about going forward?
I would just say that our economy is still strong, but next year is the governor's big budget, which we're looking for. We'll be starting that just here in a few months. But that also has a couple of large obligations we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with a Medicaid reforecast next year. Yes. Very positive. A lot of people signing up for expansion, but the base forecast. And next year is a re-benchmarking of our K through 12 mandated. So we need to continue to grow the Commonwealth because our needs are not getting any smaller. But I would just tell the citizens of Virginia right now that Commonwealth's economics are strong thanks to the work of the governor and the legislature. And we'll do what we can to make sure they continue that way.
Secretary Layne, thank you so much for being on
Thank
This
you
Week
for
in
having me,
Richmond. It's
particularly on
always great information
on tax day. That's
on
right.
tax
So thank
day.
you very much. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
This Week in Richmond is made possible in part by the Virginia Education Association. An investment in teachers today will pay dividends tomorrow. Dignity Memorial. The Dignity Network provides professional and compassionate funeral, memorial, cremation, and cemetery services throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Hospital and Healthcare Association for jobs, the economy, and public health. Virginia Tourism Corporation, promoting why Virginia is for lovers, lovers of wine and craft beers, the outdoors, beaches, history, music, and more. Fall in love with Virginia at virginia.org. Additional support provided by these sponsors. And by the members of Virginia's public television stations. Thank you.